Currently, our economy is in a long-run equilibrium. So first, we are going to use the ADS model to graphically depict the current state of the economy, which is the long-run equilibrium. We're going to start out by drawing the axes with aggregate price on the y-axis and aggregate output on the x-axis. We have our long-run aggregate supply curve being vertical at potential output, which is denoted as YP here. The potential output is the amount of goods and services that your economy can potentially produce at the current level of physical capital, human capital, and technology. Then we have a downward sloping aggregate demand curve, an upper sloping short-run aggregate supply curve, and where all these three graphs meet is your long-run equilibrium. Our long-run equilibrium output is at potential output, YP. Our long-run equilibrium price is at P star. There are a lot of notations that we're using here just to help you remind yourselves. Our capital P on the y-axis is your aggregate price. Capital Y on the x-axis is your aggregate output, or in other words, your real GDP. The vertical line is our long-run aggregate supply. Remember that for aggregate supply, we do have the timeline, long run versus the short run. And the upper sloping curve is our short run aggregate supply. And finally, the downward sloping curve is our aggregate demand coming from households, firms, government, or foreign. And our long run equilibrium shows that we are at the potential output YP and the long run equilibrium price of P star. And where all these three graphs meet is your long-run equilibrium. Now let's use the graph we drew in part A to describe the change in the economy if technological progress leads to higher productivity. If we have technological progress that leads to higher productivity, it means that we can produce more goods and services with the same amount of inputs. In other words, we're able to produce more goods and services, hence we will see an increase in our short-run aggregate supply. This will show up graphically as a rightward shift of the short-run aggregate supply curve, which is depicted in purple, and we'll name this purple line the new short-run aggregate supply curve as SRAS prime. And where the aggregate demand curve meets the new short-run aggregate supply curve is your new equilibrium. Now we see that we're not on the long-run equilibrium because we're away from the long-run aggregate supply curve. And so we are at a short-run equilibrium where our short-run equilibrium output is at Y prime and the short-run equilibrium price is at P prime. You see that currently we are producing a higher level of output at Y prime compared to our potential output of YP, which means we are experiencing an inflationary gap where our economy currently is producing more than the potential output. The difference between the current output Y prime and the potential output P is what we call an output gap. And in this case, because our current output is higher, we have an inflationary gap. Now, what will happen to this economy in the long run? Because currently, after this technological progress, we are at a short-run equilibrium, which means currently we have an output that is greater than the potential output of YP. In other words, because we are in an economic boom right now, we are employing more people compared to our initial long-run equilibrium to produce more goods and services than before. In other words, we have relatively less people unemployed, which means from the firm's perspective, it's going to be relatively harder for them to find workers to fill their vacancies. If there's more competition for unemployed workers, what will happen to nominal wages? It'll rise because firms will be trying to attract workers by offering higher nominal wages. And we know that this can only happen as we shift from the short run to the long run, because in the short run, we have sticky wages. People are bound by contracts and wages can't move freely during the short run. But as we move towards the long run, contracts expire, workers can renegotiate, and firms can also offer higher wages as a result. Nominal wages become flexible in the long run. So as nominal wages rise, it also means that firms face a higher cost for their production because they need to pay more for their workers, which means the short-run aggregate supply will fall. So initially, due to technological progress, we had our short-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right, to the purple line. But as we move towards the long run, we are going to see our short-run aggregate supply curve shifting back to the left side. Now, it might not shift completely where we're still at a short-run equilibrium, which is denoted by the green line and the green dot. We might still have an inflationary gap, even though it will be smaller than before. Then the process that we just depicted will happen again. Still, there will be relatively more people being employed compared to the long-run equilibrium, relatively less unemployment. Nominal wages will continue to rise as there is still competition for the limited number of unemployed workers. Your short-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left again till we are at the long-run equilibrium, where we are back to the original short-run aggregate supply curve. Once we're back at the long-run equilibrium, we don't have relatively less number of people unemployed. Firms are back to square one, and firms don't have any more incentive to raise nominal wages more. And so our economy stops moving, our short-run aggregate supply stops shifting to the left anymore. And so we are back at the same long-run equilibrium where our equilibrium price is at the same level as our P star. Our equilibrium output is also back at the potential output.